Hello, good people, and welcome to Finance Skills Hub. Here we learn, we connect, and we grow. This is an interesting video. We want to learn how to build a debtors agent report or receivables agent report. This can be adapted to also a payables agent report. The whole idea is to be able to categorize the number of outstanding days that your invoices are due. It's normally used for planning purposes and cash flow management. So in this short video, we want to learn how to do that schedule with just regular formulas. And then I'll show you how to automate the entire process using Power Query, Power Pivot to make it easier to create a dynamic output or a simple dashboard if you like. So there's a lot in here. We'll share the files with you so you can practice step by step. So join me in Excel and let's go through this together. Okay, so this is our final work. Now, it shows the invoice numbers, the gross amount, the various categories of the outstanding days. Okay, the unique thing about this is that we can slice by any attributes. In this case, I'm slicing by the company we send the invoices to. Okay, now this is also dynamic in the sense that I can change the reporting date. So this is reporting as at the end of the year. If I want to do it as of today, I can update this date. Okay, so control semicolon for today's date, right? When I refresh, it's now going to recalculate, okay, and then move the numbers accordingly as at the time you are doing this, or you can push it back depending on your reporting timelines, right? Now, you also notice that if I click on any vendor, even if there are no numbers in those specific columns, these labels in the columns stay, okay? So it's a bit robust, and we've also separated this from the original data so that this can just collate, or you can just input the invoices. You could also use this as a dimension table, vary the labels and the categories and all that. All this is going to be automated so that when you update this side of the workbook, on refresh, your output also updates automatically. Right. So we'll do this with regular Excel formulas. Then I'll show you how to make it a bit more robust using Power Query and Power Pivot. So let's get started. Okay, so this is our stats workbook and we have two tables here. So this table is for the invoices. It's already a table. So if you come to a table design, this has been named invoices. Okay. Now, on the other side, you have the dimension table, which actually categorizes the aging and then the number of days, the minimum points. We are going to use this for a lookup. This, again, you can change it depending on how you want to categorize. Okay, so this has also been named. We have this as aging, so invoices and aging. Then for our reporting date, because we want to make it dynamic, we are going to name this range. Okay, so this range, I'm going to name it reporting. I select cell C2 and I'll go in here and I'll name this reporting, press enter. Right, so I now have these three elements. Now, let's learn how to do this with regular formulas before we even go into Power Query and Power Pivot. So because it's a table, basically what I need to do is to first calculate the number of outstanding days. Okay. So to do that, I'm going to add a new column called days. Okay. Then I'm going to subtract this reporting date and the due date. Okay. So usually when the invoice is issued, there's a due date, maybe there's a grace period, all those things can be factored in to get your due date. So this is a simple subtraction. I'll stand in the first cell, put an equal to select reporting. Okay. And then subtract the due date from here. Okay. Then when I press enter, I get this output. It's the right answer, but it's formatted as a date. So I'll highlight this, Control Shift tilde to format this as general, right? So what this means is that for the invoices that were due in May, there are 105 days outstanding, August 14 days, and so on, right? These ones that are negative are not due yet. You realize that as of today, the dates are in the future. We just put in these days to help you accommodate all the scenarios. Okay. So these are our days outstanding. Now, to be able to bring in the right labels or the aging categories, we need to do a lookup. Okay, so we'll do a lookup on this table to be able to assign whether it's 1 to 30, 31 to 60, and so on. Now, I'm going to use index match, and then later I'll use XLOOKUP, right? So let's call this agent. So for index match, I'll start with an equal to index. Okay, call the name of my table, which is called agent. Okay, and then bring my square brackets. For my index array, that's my answer, I'm looking for agent. Okay, so this is the column that I want as my answer. Bring a comma and then introduce match. So match requires a lookup value. My lookup value is days, okay, which I am matching with the days column here. So I could select this as well, or I can type agent days, the table, and then the column name, and then I'll bring a comma. So now this is the part that you need to pay attention, because 105 days is not exactly in this lookup table. So you're going to use something that is less than our lookup value, right? So we choose this less than for this purpose. I'll close match, I'll close index, and then I'll press enter, right? So this gives us our labels. So you see that the ones that are 10 days outstanding fall between 1 to 30 days, right? Now, this is where XLOOKUP would have been ideal, because for those that are not due yet, they return an error. Okay, so we now have to wrap this around an if error. So an if error, come all the way here, and then maybe put in not due for those that return an error. Okay, so this is for the index match option. So let's do the same thing using XLOOKUP, right? So if I'm using XLOOKUP, I'll come XLOOKUP. The days here is my lookup value, right? I'm matching this with a lookup array in the other table, which is days. So agent days, I've selected this. Then I'll bring my comma. My return array, the answer column I'm looking for is this one. Okay. So the advantage here is that when I use XLOOKUP, if there is no hit or there's no answer, I get to put in if not found, right? So for if not found, we'll put in double quotes, not due, right? And then I'll come to my match mode. So my match mode, just as we did earlier, if the exact days are not found in the table, bounce back to the next smaller item. So in the case of XLOOKUP, that is -1, right? So we'll choose -1, and then we'll close this bracket. Okay, then I press enter. So that's a bit smoother. So either way, whether you have index match or XLOOKUP, you can do the lookup to get the agent categories. Now that we have this, we'll now go and insert a pivot table on this. So I'll stand in here, go to insert, and then we'll insert a pivot table from this table range. Okay. And then I'll take it into a new worksheet. Now over here, based on the output that we have, we want to see the invoice numbers, the gross amount, and then we'll break this down using the various categories. Okay. So first, let's take our gross amount to values. I'll drag this here, and then I'll break this down by the invoice number in the row section. So I have something like this. Now, because I also want to see the gross amount when I break it down, I'll take the gross amount again into the row section. Now, this goes down, is indented, but I can change the pivot table layout. So I can go to design, okay, go to report layout, and then show this in a tabular form. So when I do this, I can come back to the same place and then choose not to show subtotals. So this way I get my invoice numbers, my gross amount, and then the sum of gross amount. Now I can break this down using the agent in my columns. So I'll take agent and then break it down here. Okay. If I take off the grand total, so I'll come to design and then take off my grand totals, let it stay only for columns. Okay. I get my invoice amount, my gross amount, and then it is correctly applied to the category, right? Now, the challenge with this approach is that if a certain category doesn't have any invoice, it doesn't show up at all. So this is what we hope to deal with when we go to Power Query and Power Pivot, right? Because ideally, if I come to the pivot table options under display, I should be able to show items with no data, right, on either row or column, but this is grayed out. So So we'll fix this using the other option. Okay. And apart from that, we also want to separate the calculations from the data table and then make it independent, but it's dynamic when it refreshes. We'll cover all that in the Power Query. So if you're okay with this, we are going to use the same logic to do our Power Query Power Pivot method. So let's start that option. Okay, so for this purpose, we start from scratch again. Now, table is still invoices. We also have our agent table here. I'll rename this. I'm going to call this reporting. Okay, so we've gone through the logic essentially. We are going to use the same thing. Now, I have these three names. That is the invoices, the agent, and the reporting. I want to take this to Power Query, right? So to be able to do that, I'll come to data, get data. Okay, then we'll come to from other sources and go all the way down and launch a blank query. Okay, so you click on blank query and then it opens Power Query for you. Now, in order to be able to extract those tables and the named cell, we are going to use the mcode function excel.currentWorkbook. Okay, so equal to excel.currentWorkbook, open and close brackets. Now, if you're using this method, ensure that the only tables and names you have are the ones you are using. Otherwise, it will loop in any extra table when you refresh, right? So I press enter and then I have my invoices table, my agent, and my reporting. So we need to now extract the content of each. Now, to make it easier, what we are going to do is that we'll go to the second one, okay, on the table side, right click in the first column, and then we'll add this as a new query. So this brings the agent table. We'll repeat the process, come back to query 1, and then I'll come to the third one, and then I'll add this as a new query. So that gives me reporting. Okay. Then I'll come to query 1. This is where I have my invoices. So to have access to the content, I'll click on the table name right here. Okay. So if I name this invoices, essentially, I now have all my two tables and the named range reporting. The reason we're putting the reporting is that we want to use it as parts of our transformation process so that it links up to our final output. Okay, now we are going to maintain all the columns in our invoice table, but we want to format the invoice date, okay, properly. So I'll format this invoice date and then I'll do same for the due date as well. Right, so if I'm doing... Okay, so now that we've done this, let's go through the same steps that we did earlier. The first one is to calculate the outstanding days or the age. Okay, so just as we did, we are going to subtract the current date, okay, and the due date. So I've selected the due date. I'll come to add column and then you see the date icon here. So this allows us to calculate any date attribute. So I'm going to subtract using this age label here. So I'll click on age and then you see that it gives me a new column in a duration format, right? The number of outstanding days. Now we need this in a number format. So I'm going to format this as a whole number. Okay. Now what this basically did was that it used today's date, okay, which is linked to your laptop or your computer's time. But we want it to use the reporting date, right? So we'll come to the step before where it inserted the age. If you look closely, you realize that it used this date time dot local now. This part is what is used in this calculation. We want to replace it with the value we put in the cell in Excel. Right, so to do that, I'll come to reporting. Okay, now we want to use this name in that formula. Now to be able to do that, we can't use it as a query. So we have to drill down to get that absolute value. So please right click on this and then you choose drill down. Okay, so we'll now get this absolute value that we can use in that part of the formula. Now you come back to invoices. Okay, come to the inserted age and then gently highlight this part here. Okay, so I highlight this part and then instead of the date time dot local now, we replace it with reporting, which is right here. Right, so I'll click on this and then I press enter. So the expectation is that once I've done this, we should still have the same age calculation, which is as at today. Okay, so I have all my ages right here. So we've done the subtraction. Now let's do the lookup. So if you follow the first part, we had to now look up the correct age label from the agent table. Okay, so that agent table is right here, right? So to be able to do that lookup, we need to do a merge. Now, if you look at the agent table, I have the agent categories here and then the days here. So for starters, let's get the right data types. I've highlighted all. I'll come to transform and then detect data type. So this is text. These are numbers. Okay. We need to look up the right agent, but we don't exactly have the number of days. So we'll do something like an approximate lookup. So let's learn how to do that. I'll come to invoices, and then under the home tab, I'll come to merge queries. Okay. So I'll do a merge queries on this current query. So I'll click on merge queries. So basically I need to have the two tables side by side, right? So I already have my invoices table. I'll drop this down and then go to my agent. Okay. So the common column, to be able to look up, I need to match the common column. Where we are, the common column here is age, which is the number of outstanding days, and then the days label, the minimum points in our categories. So if you match these two, we don't really expect any match. Okay, so you have 0 hits, but we are going to do the full outer join. Okay, so I'll select full outer join, which brings both tables side by side. Okay, so if I do that and I click OK, the expectation is that I now have the agent table to the right of my original table. Okay, I'm going to expand this. So I'll click on this and then uncheck use original column name as prefix, and then I'll click OK. So if you look at it closely, the two columns of my agent table are now to the right, and then my original table is to the left. Okay, it has sort of appended the second table. Now, this is what we need to do. In the first column, we have the age or days outstanding under the column age. And then in the second table, we have the same type under a column called days. Okay, I need to bring these two in one column. Okay, so that I'll be able to sort and then pick the position of my labels. So we are going to do that using a conditional column. Okay, so we are going to write a conditional column. So I'll come to add column, then I'll start a conditional column here. Okay, so we'll leave it as custom for now. Then I'll start my conditional column. So if, let me pull this down so you appreciate what is going on. So if this age column, okay, so I'm going to select this, okay, it's equal to now, okay, then I want you to bring the days. Okay, so I'll select this and then select column, come in here and then choose so I'll choose days. Okay, then otherwise I want you to return the original age column. Okay, so this will put the two numbers in one column. So I'm going to click OK. So once I click OK, I now have the two numbers in the same column. Now, once I have this, let me change the data type. So I'm going to use a whole number for this purpose. I'm now going to sort this in ascending order. So to do that, I'll come to home. Then I'll use this one, sort ascending, and then I have this in ascending order. Right. So you notice that for the ones that are not due, they are on top. Then the 1 to 31 days follows. And then the 31 to 60 also follows 61 in that order, right? So based on that logic, what we are going to do is that I'll come to agent 1, okay, right click. Because of the positioning of the labels, I should be able to now fill down. So I'll come here and then I'll fill down. So this now gives me the right labels sorted, okay. Now at this point, you also realize that anywhere the labels begin, I have a now. So I'll come in any of the columns and then filter out the now. Then I do this. So my table is taking shape. Okay. At this point, I can now take off these two helper columns that came from the other table. I'll right click and remove these columns. Okay, so now if you look at it, the ones that are showing now are the ones that are not due yet. So I'll take advantage of this and then replace the now values. Okay, so I'll right click, choose replace values. Value to find is now, and I'm going to replace with not due. Okay, and then I'll click OK. All these steps we are doing is going to be automated. Okay, so anytime you update a table, all these will kick in. Now let's properly name this. So let's call this agent. Okay, so now that we have this, we have our invoices, we have our agent, we have something to link it up with, and then we have our reporting. Okay, we can now go and then connect the two tables, that is invoices and agent, in Power Pivot. Okay, so I'll come to home. First, I have to load it. So home, close and load to the second option. So once I do this, I can now create a connection because we don't want this as extra tables. Remember, we've scanned all the tables. We don't want an extra table. And then I'll add this to the data model and then I'll click OK. So what it's going to do is that all the queries are going to be loaded as connections into the data model. But we can disconnect the reporting query, right click this, load to, and then just uncheck the add to the data model option, and then I'll click OK. Right, you can ignore this warning for now. Okay, so our two queries are on standby. So now let's go to Power Pivot. Power Pivot is the environment for data modeling in Microsoft Excel. If you have it, it should show up as a tab here. If you don't, you can activate it for the first time. You go to data, right? In the data tools group, you have this icon, right? So when you click on it, so you have Power Pivot open up. You can close it and it's enabled. You should now have Power Pivot right here, right? Now, based on what we've done, if we go to Power Pivot, we go to manage, we should now see our two tables, which is invoices and agent, in the Power Pivot environment. Okay, so I'll come to the diagram view and then you notice that I have my agent and my invoices here. So what we would have done with an XLOOKUP or index match, by just connecting these two, we get access to all the labels, right? So I place it this way and then I'm going to connect agent to agent right here. Okay, so this becomes my dimension table and this now becomes my fact table. Okay, so if you are done, you can now exit using the pivot table option because the final output is a pivot table. So you click on the pivot table icon, click on pivot table, and then we are going to put this in a new worksheet. Okay, so with this pivot table, we have access to the two tables. So let's go through the same layout. So I'll open my invoices, drag my gross amount to the value section. Okay, just as we did earlier, I want to break this down using the invoice numbers on the row side. Okay, and then I want to also see the gross amounts in the row section as well. So I'll bring this here. Now I'll come to the pivot table design. In the report layout, show this in tabular form. So I have something like this. Then I can come to agent, okay, open up agent, and then break down in the column section by the agent categories. So I'll do something like this, right? Now, this gives us a lot of advantages. For starters, you realize that you have a blank. If you have followed the story, I'm sure you know why there's a blank. Because for those that were not due, we don't have a label for it in our original table. Okay, so let's fix this. It's just a simple fix. We'll go to the original input table. Okay, we have all the labels here, but there's no label for blanks. So let's just expand this and then put in not due. Because the table, the expectation is that when I do this and I refresh, so let's come to our data. So we come to data, come to refresh, and then do a refresh all. Okay, so when I do a refresh all, I now have all my labels right here. Okay, Now, let's see if the problem we had earlier is fixed. So I'll come activate my pivot table, and then we had a slicer on companies, right? So I'll come to company, right click, and then add this as a slicer. Okay, so we have something like this. Now, for our final dashboard, we want everything to be robust. We don't want to miss any category. Okay, so currently my 60 days is not showing. If I do vendor A, it shrinks and all that. So let's see how we can quickly fix that. So for starters, I'm going to right click inside the pivot table, come to pivot table options, okay, go to display, and now I can choose to show items with no data on columns, right? Then I click OK. So I now have all my labels showing, okay. Then if I click, you realize that it still stays, okay. So this is one fix. Now the other issue is that I want to make the format of the pivot table also stay. So back to the pivot table options, I'll uncheck auto fit column widths on updates, and then I'll click OK. So again, at this point, you realize that everything stays, whether we have labels or not. Okay, I can go ahead and then take off the grand totals. So I'll just maintain it for columns only. So this part goes off, right? So at this point, our staging is set for our final dashboard. We have our slicer, we have our table, okay? Now, the colors that we applied to the final output has a certain logic. So the logic is that the higher the outstanding days, the greener it is, okay? But if it is more recent, then we use a lighter shade, okay? So it's this logic that we have used. Now, this is also dynamic, okay? The pivot table maintains the same format whether you slice or not. So that's what we want to achieve. Now, to be able to do that, we want to rearrange the order of the aging labels. Okay, so we can also automate this, but based on the arrangement, we want to bring not due as number 1, and then 1 to 30, and the rest follows, right? So the advantage with using Power Query and Power Pivot is that once you update any of the tables on refresh, it just falls in line. So let's add a sort column. Okay, here I can choose how to order this. So not due is going to be number 1, and then 2, 3, 4, and 5 in that order, right? Once I've done this, I'll click and refresh all so that it goes into my data model in the Power Pivot. So once I've done this, I'll come to Power Pivot, go to Manage. Now, when I come here, I left it at the diagram view. I'll switch to the data view, and then I'll come to my agent table. So you realize that my sort column has been added here. Now, basically what we want is that we want to sort this agent column, okay, by the sort column. So when you select it, look for this icon, sort by column, okay, and then we are going to sort this by the sort column, and then I'll click OK. So based on the arrangement that we've put in there, we expect our pivot table to update when we go back. Okay, so let's go back to our pivot table. So you realize that it falls in line. Okay, so for our final formatting, this is what we are going to do. So let's see if this still stays. So this is still stable. Okay, so now let's proceed and then format our final dashboard. So first, we want to highlight the whole pivot table. So I'll stand here, highlight the whole of this. Now, based on my laptop dimension, I'm going to increase the width to about 15. Okay, so we can go to Home, Format, and then Column Width. Okay, so this, I'm going to put in 15 to make it a bit bigger. And then for the row height, I'll come to Home, Format, and then for the row height, I'll make this 20. Again, it depends on your screen. Okay, so let me just fold this up. Right, we want it to be a bit more visible. Okay, then for our pivot table, we want to come to the pivot table design and then choose this shade of green, the light green. Okay, so we have something like this, right? Then for the tabular layout, we have sum of gross amounts. We don't really need that. I'm going to take this out. I can't delete it, so I'll just put a space here and then press enter. Okay. Now, what we want to achieve is we want to color based on the column position. Okay. So for all those that are not due, if you look at it, they are in column 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to put in the conditional format that will now color all those that are green, all those that are not due in column 4 in a particular shade. Then we duplicate that for column 5, change the color, and then we just increase the intensity of the green as we go to the right. Right. So let's learn how to do that. Now, to be able to know the column I'm in, the Excel formula that we use is column, open close brackets, and then you close the brackets. So this is column 4. Okay. If I take this all the way to the right, Control R, okay, this is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm doing this because I want to use the column numbers to apply the format. Okay. So let's do that quickly. So first, I'm going to highlight this range, right? So when I highlight this, I can set the pivot table in the conditional format. But for starters, you can highlight this range, go to home, okay, come to conditional format, and then we are going to use a new row. Okay. So for the new row, what we are going to do is that instead of it applying to the range we have selected, we want it to apply to all cells showing values. Okay, then I'll come down to use a formula to determine which cells to format. So basically the formula should return true and then the color is applied. So what we want is that so put in an equal to, then column, which is the function, then I'll come and select this here. I want to make this dynamic, so take off the dollar signs, F4, 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 so just D6, and I'll close my brackets. Now, if it's column number 4, based on my positioning, so if it's equal to 4, this is going to return true. Okay, the format that I want is the light green color, right? So for the format, I'll go to format. Okay, I'm using this pillar. Okay, so I'll start from here and then increase the intensity. So I'll click on this light shade. So that's going to be my fill. Then while I'm here, I'll also put in a border line. So the border line I'm going to choose is going to be this gray. Then I'll click on the bottom border line and I'll click OK. So we basically have to do this once and then we just duplicate it for the rest. Okay, so I'll click OK. Now you notice that this has applied it to this part of our pivot table. Now I'll go to home, go to conditional formatting, and then now manage rules. Okay, so from this first one that we did, I'm going to duplicate the rule. Okay, it creates a new one on top, and then I'll edit this rule. So all I'm changing here is that if it's column number 5, come to the format, go to fill, and then we choose the next shade of gray, and I'm going to click OK. Okay, then I'll click OK. Now, just to be sure this is working, you can apply it at this stage. Okay, so you realize that it just kicks in, goes to the next one. Okay, so again, I'll duplicate this rule, edit this rule, then change this to column number 6, come to format. Okay, I'll choose the next level of green, click OK. Okay, and then I'll click OK here. So when I apply, you see that the next shade also comes in like that. Right, so let's do the last but one. So I'm going to duplicate this rule, edit this rule. That is column number 7. Okay, now for column number 7, when we click on the format, you realize that we are going to this 4th level of green, right? It will help to invert the font color, right, to improve the contrast. So I'll come to font and then choose white for the font color. Every other thing remains the same. So I'll click OK and I'll click OK for this. When I apply, you notice that that also comes in like that. And then finally, I'll duplicate this last one, come to edit rule, make this number 8. Okay, go to format. And then for the fill, I'll choose the last green, which is the deepest. And then I'll click OK. So if I click OK and now I apply, you notice that I now have the intensity spread from the not due all the way to my 90 plus, right? Now, the way we've done it, it's going to be dynamic. Okay, so you notice that if I come in here, the numbers always show. While we are here, let's make our slicer align with our theme. So I'll click on the slicer, drop this down, and then I'll choose this slicer color. Okay, so we have this nicely here. Okay, now this is working, but let's now work on the dynamic reporting date. So I'm going to put in a cell here called reporting date. And then this is going to be my input, right? So for now, we have today's date. So I'll put in today's date here, Control-Shift-#, right? Now we want whatever we put in here to feed the original cell. Okay, so I'll do an equal sign and then I'll come and then select this. Okay, so that we have the two communicating. So now that we have this, let's test. If I don't want it to calculate now and I want to push this, let's say, to the end of the year, assuming all the invoices are not paid. Okay, so this is 12/31/24. That is that. So the expectation is that if I refresh, it should push those that are not due a bit towards the right. Okay, so I'll come to data and then I'll click on refresh all. It's going through Power Query, Power Pivot, and then it just pushes all these, right? The same value when you sum, it's still the 3,338,000. Okay, so we've set it up in such a way that this now becomes something like your output or your dashboard. You can make the changes that you want, and then when the original input sheet changes, you can still maintain the columns, break it down by any attribute that you want. You can also manipulate the dimension table for aging, review the labels and all those things, right? So hopefully you learned some few tricks. You could do it with regular formulas, as I mentioned earlier, but if you want to automate the process and then pass it through Power Query and Power Pivot, you can also do that. Maybe you're new to Power Query and Power Pivot and you want an exposure to these tools in Excel to help you analyze data and then automate your process. I'd like to introduce you to my book, Data Modeling with Microsoft Excel. So you can get it on Amazon. The link has been posted there. So it walks you through a full case study where you get to use Power Query, Power Pivot, DAX formulas, cube functions, and all those things. So you can grab a copy using the link and hopefully you can get some further insights on how to use these tools in Excel. The Start Excel sheet has been made available in the video description. You can take it and come along step by step. Thank you so much for joining us and we'll see you in the next video.
If this video was helpful and you'd like to receive more of these videos directly on WhatsApp, you can send ad to this WhatsApp number. We will add you directly to our broadcast list so you receive our videos when we post them. Alternatively, you could join our channel on WhatsApp using the link below or use the QR code scanned directly to follow our channel on WhatsApp. Please visit our YouTube channel, Finder Skills Hub. Please subscribe so you get notified when we post new videos, or connect with us on any of these social media handles. Thank you so much for watching.